On this episode of the Why I'm Right podcast, today is Thursday, April 11th, and today we're talking about a very important issue to this country. Yesterday, a Democrat congresswoman from Texas came out. Her name was Jasmine Crockett. She came out yesterday and had a very interesting take on an issue near and dear to many people's hearts. I'm talking about reparations for slavery in this country and the ideology behind why there should be reparations in this country, why there shouldn't be reparations in this country. We're going to dive into all of that on this episode of the Why I'm Right podcast, and I'm going to give you my reasoning and my understanding and my beliefs on why I don't think there should be reparations in this country. So make sure you listen up because I'm about to tell you why I'm right.
We live in a world filled with noise and confusion, clickbait, and outright lies in the media. But here, we cut through the clutter to find the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. This is Why I'm Right, the podcast where we dig deeper, ask the tough questions, and unravel the tangled webs of political and current events. Join us as we dissect the latest news, analyze political rhetoric, and challenge the narratives that dominate the mainstream discourse. We're not shy. From dissecting the motives behind policy decisions to uncovering the hidden agendas of public figures, it's what we do. It's time to think for ourselves. This is Why I'm Right. And now your unafraid and unapologetic host, Matt Taylor.
Like he said, my name's Matt Taylor. I'm your host, and this is the Why I'm Right podcast. If you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, I ask you to do me one favor and just click the button right here below. Make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast because it helps me out a ton. The goal for me, the goal for us is to grow the Common Sense Army every single day, and one way you can help out by doing is just clicking that link right there below, clicking the button right there below, and making sure you both like and subscribe to this podcast so that we can grow every single day, because my goal is to get more people, more like-minded people, more people to disagree with me, because at the end of the day, I believe the most important right in this country and most important thing going on in this country right now is free speech and the ability to have a discourse, a disagreement, in a respectful manner. So make sure you share this video with all of your friends, and let's continue to grow the Common Sense Army one day at a time, one podcast at a time. And without further ado, today's podcast, let's dive right into it, because today's podcast, we're talking about Jasmine Crockett. She's a Democrat congresswoman from the state of Texas, the great state of Texas. And she had a very interesting take this week. I heard it yesterday. I'm not exactly sure when she said it, but I heard it yesterday. And so I wanted to bring it to your attention today because I think it opens up an argument and a conversation that we need to have in this country today to make America better and make America a place of prosperity for all. So without further ado, here's the clip of Jasmine Crockett giving her opinion and her belief on reparations and a new idea that she just heard from a celebrity, it sounded like. So make sure you listen to this one. Anything you hear from a celebrity should be pretty good. So make sure you listen up here. This is Jasmine Crockett telling us why we need reparations and giving a solution that she has for reparations.
Just this past week, I saw, I don't remember which celebrity, but it was actually a celebrity. And I was like, I don't know that that's not necessarily a bad idea, but I'd have to think through it a lot. One of the things that they propose is black folk not have to pay taxes for a certain amount of time, because then again, that puts money back in your pocket. But at the same time, it may not be as objectionable to some people about actually giving out dollars. Yeah. But obviously then you start dealing with the different tax brackets and things like that. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, we argue the reparations make sense, because so many black folk, not only do you owe for the labor that was stolen and killed and all the other things, right? Mm-hmm. But the fact is, like, we end up being so far behind, right? And so it's like, how do you bring forth people? Exactly. And so it's like, if you do the no tax thing for people that are already, say, struggling and aren't really paying taxes in the first place, it doesn't really exactly.
They may want those checks like they got during COVID.
Exactly.
You hear that at the end? they may not even want no taxes because they might not be paying those taxes. They may just want those checks that you sent out during COVID. And to pause here for a second and think about it, I think those checks we all got during COVID, or many of us got during COVID, are now proving to be a problem, right? If you remember, when we sent out $2,000 to every American in this country, we sent out whatever the number was multiple times to try to limit the impact of COVID-19. It sounded great in the short run, but long term, look at what it's done for inflation. And I go back to it. This is the same argument we could make about minimum wage requirements in this country. When you think about McDonald's, guess what? If the minimum wage has to be hiked up to $15 or $20 an hour for a low-level employee, a cashier at McDonald's, the reality is McDonald's is going to have to charge more for that burger, for those McNuggets, for whatever you're getting at McDonald's. It's called a trickle-down effect. And so something that might sound great on paper, hey, let's have minimum wage be $15 an hour. Well, guess what? McDonald's has to rake up their prices in order to pay that employee the $15 an hour. And it's an effect that continues from there. It's a ripple effect that goes throughout the entire country. And that's why everything from gasoline to groceries, we see inflation. And so when we sent out all the money during COVID-19 to try to boost the economy and make the economy flourish, again, it might have worked in the short run, but long term, look at what it's doing to inflation and look at what it's doing to average everyday people in this country. And so now let's pause the COVID conversation. Let's pause the money conversation. Let's pause the minimum wage conversation. And let's talk about what this podcast today is about. If you remember what she just said when we listened to it, Jasmine Crockett, the Democrat congresswoman from Texas, said that black folk maybe shouldn't pay taxes for a period of time, and that'll be a form of reparation for slavery. And if you take a second and think about that for a second, black folks shouldn't pay taxes as a form of reparations for slavery. And it's my belief, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe this is something that you could email me, to disagree with. We could have a conversation about it. But I believe the only way that we can decrease and eliminate racism once and for all in this country is if we stop looking at race entirely. And so when we see things like ideas like black folks shouldn't pay taxes for a period of time, and that somehow makes up for reparations, or affirmative actions with colleges where we're talking about trying to make sure colleges are diverse and giving an advantage to people of certain backgrounds and beliefs, and DEI and major and large corporations across this country. And it comes down to this. I believe the only way that we decrease and eliminate racism in this country is if we stop looking at race entirely. And I don't want to sit here and completely, shut down the reparations argument, but I feel like we have to at this point. Because if you look at the common sense approach to this issue, slavery was abolished on December 6th of 1865. What does that mean? That means even though slavery was an evil, and I want to be very clear here because if someone disagrees with me, I'm going to be called a racist. If someone disagrees with any of us, they use the word racist to somehow push back on a common sense argument here. And so I want to be very clear. I'm not a racist. I want to be very clear. When I say that slavery was abolished in 1865, December 6th to be exact, what does that mean for black people in this country today, white people in this country today? It means that slavery is an evil that not one black person in this country today experienced. And if we had reparations in this country, those reparations will be paid for by people who none of them were slave owners. I'm going to say that one more time. If we have any kind of reparations in this country, any kind of reparations whatsoever, it's important to remember that slavery was abolished in this country on December 6, 1865. And so anyone that receives any kind of reparation would have never experienced the evil that slavery was. Anyone that's paying in or paying taxes that go towards those reparations are people who never owned slaves themselves. And so the common sense approach is, what are we paying these people for? Because at the end of the reality is this: not every black person in this country even comes from a family of slaves. Not every black person in this country or white person in this country comes from a family that owns slaves. You know, people have this misconstrued ideology behind slavery in this country, and the reality is this: people say people from the South had slavery, had slaves. Well, the reality is, even though slavery was a major problem, and again, I want to be very clear, an evil in this country, only 25% of people in the South, below the Mason-Dixon line, actually had slaves in the 1800s. Now, does that make it any better? No, it doesn't. But I think it's important to bring some facts to this argument, because at the end of the day, if slavery ended in 1865, there's not a black person or white person or Hispanic person or any person in this country who had a direct impact from slavery. So if we start doing reparations in this country at all, reparations in this country, what are we paying towards? Because there's been atrocities in this nation, in this world, against people of different backgrounds, not just black people in this country, not just slaves in this country. What about Jews during the Holocaust? Is Germany paying those Jews some sort of reparation? And if they did, would they pay every single Jew in the world? And that's where the argument comes into play. It's a very difficult conversation to have, because the reality is it's a super hot button issue for many people. But my problem with the argument is when the same people, the people like Jasmine Crockett, who are now suggesting that black folk don't pay taxes for a period of time, and that somehow makes up for slavery back in the 1800s, it doesn't make sense. And those same people, like a Jasmine Crockett, who's a Democrat congresswoman in Texas, those same people are the same people like you and me who are benefiting off of slave labor today. Let me make sense of that for a second. What did I just say? I just said you and I are benefiting off of slave labor today. The reality is we are. The reality is she is. The reality is everyone in this country, for the most part, is benefiting off of slave labor in this country. Because when you buy something from Adidas, or you buy something from Nike, or you buy something from Apple, how many of us have an Apple iPhone? How many of us have an Apple computer? How many of us have Nike shoes? How many of us have an Adidas clothing? Right? If you think about this ideology behind it, slave labor was used to create every product that we're purchasing, most of the products that we're purchasing in our society today. Are there reparations when we do that? No. And so again, I go back to it. The only way that we can decrease racism in this country and eventually get towards the movement and towards the dream that MLK had and Malcolm X had in this country is if we stop looking at race completely. And so this argument for black folk not paying taxes bleeds into many arguments in this country regarding race, and many issues in this country regarding the way we deal with race. And I go back to it. When you think about affirmative action, when you're going to give somebody an unfair advantage today to get into a college based on their race, based on their class, or based on their gender, how is that any different from discrimination the other way? Affirmative action is the number one example of reverse discrimination. And if you look at DEI, that's diverse, equity, and inclusion, many large corporations in this country today have DEI agendas and DEI mandates for their companies, meaning they have to hire a certain person, a certain amount of black people, a certain amount of transgender people, a certain amount of white people, a certain amount of Hispanic people, a certain amount of females, a certain amount of males. And when you start to split it up and start saying we have to hit a quota, what happens is the most qualified person for that job may or may not get there. The most qualified person for that college may or may not get in. It's a problem. And I am of the belief, and maybe this is a radical belief, maybe it is. And if it is, I apologize. But I'm of the belief that if we don't have affirmative action, we don't have DEI in this country, and we didn't try to fit the quotas, and we hired people regardless of their race, regardless of their class, regardless of their gender, we had people get into colleges regardless of their race, regardless of their class, regardless of their gender, I believe this country would have an unbelievable diversity, because I am of the radical belief that minorities in this country are better than we give them credit for. When you tell them the only reason they're going to get into a college, or that they have an unfair advantage to get into a college, or they have an unfair advantage to get into a jobs position, or hired at a large company, when you think about it, what is that telling them? That they need some sort of help to get there. And I am of the radical belief that that's not the truth. I believe in a system of capitalism that the most qualified person will get the job. The most qualified person will get into the school, and the most qualified person will be a minority in many cases. And so if we took off on a college resume, a college application, if we took off the question completely, what is your race? What is your gender? And we just had people get into colleges based on the merit, or get a job based on the merit, I believe there'd be more diversity than you may think. And so I go back to it. The only way that we can decrease racism in this country is if we focus on being colorblind, and not looking at color, and not looking at race, and not looking at class, and not looking at gender, and not looking at religion, and not looking at political view. And so this whole idea behind, should black folk not pay taxes in this country? No, that's stupid. That is stupid. Let's call it for what it is. Because if you really want to break it down, many of the taxpayer government programs in this country, funded by taxpayer dollars, target helping and incentivizing and aiding predominantly black and minority communities. So the tax dollars right now, many of them are going into inner city communities that help black people in this country, that help minorities in this country. And so I hate having this race conversation, but if we really want equality, I'm not talking about equity, a word that they throw out, it's wordplay. Equity equals socialism, right? If you really break it down, equity equals socialism. When they say things, we need to be more equitable, that is another word for we need to be more socialist. Equality is what Martin Luther King strived for. Equality is what people who really want a equal society for all, one nation. And so, again, these issues right here play into many people's heart. And many people out there are going to disagree with everything I just said to you, which is fine. But let's have a conversation about it. Because here's the thing. If black folks stop paying taxes, who stops paying taxes next? And when I say that, I said it earlier, there have been atrocities in this country. There have been outbursts in this country. And again, I'm not minimizing slavery. Slavery was evil. Slavery was bad. I can't say it enough. I don't want this message being twisted here. So I have to reiterate the point over and over. But if we now say some form of reparations for something that happened in the 1800s is for people in the 21st century to not pay taxes because of their race, based on the chance that someone in their family line at some point was enslaved, it's idiotic. Because there have been atrocities against other races, other classes in this country. Does that mean they're now going to get to not pay their taxes? And where does the line end? And so I'm for many programs. Like I said earlier, I'm for programs to help any community in this country. I'm for programs that help our inner cities. But I'm not going to try to sit here and pretend that minorities in this country need the help in order to strive and thrive. And when I say that, I believe minorities, and like I said, this may be a radical opinion, a radical viewpoint, but I am of the opinion that minorities in this nation are stronger than we believe. They are capable of more. They can get into that college without the affirmative action. They can land that job without the DEI. And so this issue, I know I kind of bled them all together, but the issue of should black folk not pay taxes in this country, like I said, I summarized it at the end here. Slavery was abolished in 1865, December 6th of 1865. And if we have any kind of reparations, this will mean that people who never experienced the evil that slavery was will get a benefit paid for by people who never owned slaves themselves. For generations now. And like I said, it's a common sense approach here. I want everyone in this nation to strive. I want everyone in this nation to thrive. I want America to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. And I want America to be a place where, regardless of your skin color, regardless of your race, class, gender, through hard work, through capitalism, through doing your part, you can achieve anything. That's the nation we built. That's the nation that in 1776 our founding fathers fought for, was a nation of freedom, a nation where anyone could strive and thrive. And so as we move forward, we have many other podcasts coming out next week, this week as well. It's Thursday. I think we're doing a podcast tomorrow specifically talking about the election and specifically talking about Maine and Nebraska and their voter laws, because right now there's a debate in this country if Maine and Nebraska should change their voter laws before 2024. And it's going to get very interesting. It's going to get very, very interesting. And so we have that episode coming out tomorrow, and then later we're going to be diving in further into the DEI agenda and talk about Boeing and some of these companies that are having major, major problems based on their DEI policies that don't get the most qualified candidate. So they might be filling out a quota and meeting a quota of some sort, but is it always the right thing for the company, the right thing for the consumer? And when you see doors blowing off of airplanes, you see multiple Boeing planes go down, emergency landings across the country, at some point it comes down to this. Who do you want flying your airplane? Do you care their race? Do you care their class? Do you care their gender? Or do you want the most qualified pilot in the world to fly your airplane? It seems so crazy that this is even a conversation in this country right now. And it's sad, to be honest with you. It's sad that we have to even have this conversation. But when you have people out there in the public eye saying things like black folks shouldn't pay taxes because an atrocity that took place in the 1800s and we're now in the 21st century. It's sad that we even have to have this conversation and bring up points that some people are going to call me racist for, or some people are going to disagree with me on, which, like I said, I hope is the case, because I want to have the conversation, because I believe the only way we progress, the only way we move forward is by having the conversations that are tough, having the conversations that get anywhere. You don't accomplish anything by not going through anything. And so I want to have the conversations with you who disagree with me. And so again, this is the Why I'm Right podcast. We have a lot going on this week. Like I said earlier, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends, because we're trying to grow the Common Sense Army every single day, one podcast at a time. And so I ask you, make sure you click the subscribe button right here below. Share this video on Instagram, Facebook. Make sure you follow us at Why I'm Right on Instagram, at Why I'm Right Pod on Twitter. And if you have any questions, you want to talk to me, you want to converse back and forth, you want to argue with me, whatever it is, all you have to do is send an email right now to matt@whyimrightpodcast.com, or visit us at our website, www.whyimrightpodcast.com. And I'll be sure to get back to you and have the conversation, and maybe even have you on the podcast so we could talk about it in detail. And so I appreciate every single one of you being here today and listening to this podcast, and I look forward to continuing the conversation, like I said, one day at a time, one podcast at a time. And so this has been the Why I'm Right podcast, and I just told you why I'm right.
You've been listening to Why I'm Right. Thanks for being a part of the Common Sense Army. Our passion is to cut through the noise and confusion, and to bring light to clickbait and outright lies in the media. Unafraid, unapologetic, real and raw. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram at Why I'm Right, on X at Why I'm Right Pod. And for more, hit the website at www.whyimrightpodcast.com. See you next time.